We're on the top of DAF Yudalid, and we were learning yesterday about a man whose name was Nechemia, and his job at one period in history in the Second Temple was to be in charge of the digging of wells and reservoirs so that Jews could have water as they were making Aliyah L'Regel, as they were coming to Yerushalayim. Now this was his job. He was paid to do this. But at the same time, what a privilege. What is Zechus to be able to have a job that you could provide water for the Jewish people as they're coming up to Yerushalayim. So the Gemara now says, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, second line, Umeis beno batsama. This man's son perished by thirst. Now the question that you would ask, of course, is, where's the justice if this man is in charge of providing water? And as we're going to see, the Gemara provides a theology that if you are given a holy task, then God will be more exacting with you because of the greater level of responsibility that you have. So this fellow Nechemia, as the Taklin Chadatin points out, one day he probably slept in. Maybe he didn't do the job one day as the way he should have, and therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu was more exacting with him than if he had been working for a regular employer. And that's why the Gemara now says, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Man da Amar Rachmana Vatran, Yisvas Ran B'nei Ma'oye. That if a person says God is forgiving, don't worry, God will forgive the sin. You don't have to worry about it. Such a person is making a terrible error, and his punishment is that his intestines will be, the word for forgive and to be undone are the same word. So his intestines will unravel, essentially, because he has said that God is a forgiving or foregoing God. So his intestines will be foregone. Elamarich ruche v'gave didei. But rather you have to believe that God is sometimes forbearing, He's patient, and will give a person a chance to do tshuva. But at the end of the day, God will exact His due. Whatever you owe to Hashem for your behavior, God will collect on that. Amar Rabbi Acha, Ksiv u'suvivav nisa'aro me'od, that it says in the pasuk that those who surround God is exacting. Medaktek imahim kechut hasar. The word nisara is from the word sa'ar, which means like a hair. That God is exacting with those who surround Him, the holy ones who have holy tasks and have holy missions in life. God is exacting with them to the hair's breadth. Amar Rabbi Yossi lo mitam hazeh. It's not from that pasuk that you learn that. Ela min ma dichsiv, but rather from this pasuk. V'noruhu al kol sevivav. That God is awesome on those who surround Him. Mora'u ala krovim yotzim and harachokim. So you see that God's fear or awe is more upon those who surround Him than those who are far away. So if a person's stama shlepper and he does something wrong, God says, no, Nebuch is a shlepper. What am I going to do? But if a person is a holy yid and he's got a holy responsibility and he's got a leadership task, then Hashem says, I expect more from you. And therefore, even a minor infraction is treated more seriously. And that's essentially why the Gemara is saying this is what happened to Nechemia. Rabbi Chagai b'shem Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, Maaseh b'chasid echad shehia chofer boros shichin u'ma'aros la'ovrim v'shavim. Now we have another story which is a slightly different theology. There's a certain chassid, a man who used to do chesed for everyone. And he took it upon himself to dig wells and reservoirs for people. Now, keep in mind, this was a volunteer position. This man was not getting paid for this. And so therefore the theology changes completely. This man is devoting his life to doing chesed. And here we don't have a theology that God is going to be exacting with this individual because he hasn't been hired for this task. Everything that he does is complete tzedakah. So that's why you'll see the theology is different. One day his daughter was traveling to a faraway place because she was getting married. And so she needed to travel to another city for the wedding. A flash flood comes, and a river washes her away. Oive, Gewalt. So Vahavan kol ama alolin legabe, bon menachamte velo kibeluluye misnachama. Everyone in the community came to this poor chassid, to this poor fellow, this poor righteous man. They wanted to try and comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. All Rabbi Pinchas ben Yor legabe bo menachamte velo kibelule misnachama. Even the great Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair came to visit this man to offer him consolation, but he refused to be consoled. Amar lon dein hu chasidchon. So Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair turns to someone and he says, "This is your chassid? If this man is so pious, why does he refuse to be consoled over the loss of his daughter?" So Amrulei, Rebbe kach v'kach haya oise, kach v'kach iralei. Rebbe, he's justified in not being consolable because look, where's the justice? This man used to do everything for the community and dig for them and provide water for everyone. How could it be? Where's the justice that God should take his daughter away through water? So Amar Efshir Shayim Achabed Isbaro B'Mayim V'Hu Mekachol B'Mayim. So Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair himself said, how could it be that this man used to honor his Creator with water, and God takes away his precious daughter with water? So Miyad Nafla Havara Be'ir Bas Bito Shaloso Ha'ish. Immediately, someone cried out in the town, "We found this guy's daughter. She's alive." What happened? So Ista Amri Besuchta Is Ares V'Ista Amri Malach Yard Kidmus Rapinchas Ben Yair V'itzila. Some say, as the flood was coming, she held on to a branch for dear life, and eventually she made her way home. Like, there was a case with the tsunami recently, wasn't they? Even made a movie about this family that was in was it Thailand, Indonesia or Thailand? Indonesia, and they were there. It was vacationing during the tsunami, and people held on to branches, and their lives were saved. It was like miraculous. So some say that she held on to a branch, and some say that a malach came with the face of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair. There was in his chus that he said, "Master of the universe, how could this be? Where's the justice?" And in that, this chus of his cry, God, Hashem saved her with a malach.
Could it be that he wasn't able to be consoled because she wasn't dead? That's what we talk about with Yosef.
Interesting point. But that's also possible. Yeah. Okay. Gevine Cruz. Next, we go on to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says there was a man named Gevine. He was the crier. He would start the service in the morning by making a big announcement. Shahya Machris Beveis Hamikdash. He was the crier. Mahaya Omer Imdu Kohanim Lavoida. He would say, Kohanim, arise to do your avoda. Leviim leduchanam. Leviim, arise to stand on your platforms, get ready to play. The Yisrael Mamadam, and Yisrael assume your stations to overlook the sacrifices. Agrippas Hamelach Shama Kolo Adches Parsos V'Nasan Lamatanas Harbe. Agrippas the king once heard. I think he was Roman or Greek. I forget now whether Agrippas was Roman or Greek. But he was what? It was Roman, right? He was Roman. I believe he was Roman.
He was a good king.
He was a benevolent king. And he once heard this man crying at a distance of 8 parsas. Now, a parsa is about 4 kilometers. So he hears this guy's voice at a distance of 32 kilometers because he had such a powerful voice, and he gave him many gifts because this man was able to serve his Creator that way. Now, of course, there were no planes and trains and automobiles it was on the dawn hours, so it is conceivable that if it's completely quiet outside and a guy screams and he's got a huge voice, I don't know, maybe. Ben Gever al Ne'ilah Shor.
There's mountains surrounding him and an echo.
Bouncing off the mountain.
Right, that's right. Yodelehihu. Okay. So Ben Gever was in charge of locking the gates of the Beis HaMikdash. So Tirgem Rav Kumi de Beis Reb Shila Kara Gavra Achris Kruza. So there's a Mishnah in Maseches Yoma that talks about the first avoda that was done in the morning. And the first avoda that was done in the morning is called the Trumas Hadeshin, the scooping up of a scoop of ash and placing it on the side. And that was a special service to sort of create continuity from yesterday's service. The Mishnah says in Yoma that it was done at the call of the Gever, right? So what is the call of the Gever? So one rabbi translated it as at the announcement of a man, just like our Mishnah says that this man was named Ben Gever. He was in charge of making that announcement that, okay, time to do the Trumas Hadeshin as well as being in charge of the gates. So Amar Lei and more Kara Tarnagola. So they said no. Maybe the translation is that it was at the crow of the rooster, because the word Gever could also mean rooster, not just the man. So Amar Lei v'hataninan ben Gever Islach Lememar Bar Tarnagola, but look at the Mishnah in Shkolim. We see that the word Ben Gever is a reference to a human being, so therefore we have to assume that in the Mishnah in Yoma, when it talks about the person who announced the Trumas Hadeshen, it was also not at the crow of the rooster, but at the time of an announcement of a Gever. Either the man's name was Ben Gever, or it was just a human being. But we see that the words Ben Gever is not a reference to a rooster. Ben Babi al-Hapakia, a man named Ben Babi, he was in charge of the wicks. So Shahaya Mizayek Pisilos, he used to twist the wicks for the menorah in the temple, which, by the way, is a relatively menial task. But look, he gets top billing in the Mishnah, so that's relevant for the following story. Reb Yossi al lekufra bo'o mimanya aleihon parnasim velo kiblon minhon. So Reb Yossi once went to a village which did not have any communal leaders, and he was called upon to sort of try and sort things out. He tried to get some of the people of the village to volunteer to become the parnasim, to become the leaders who would be in charge of civic affairs. You need some kind of governmental authority in any city, but no one wanted to volunteer. They said,
"You need a good mayor.
You need a good mayor." Yeah.
Talking about wicks.
Yeah. Right. Anyway. If anyone's watching this and you're not from Canada, on Kosher Tube,
they know.
Okay, all right. The whole world knows. Okay, so anyway, so you need a good mayor, but no one wanted to volunteer. I guess they all had the same problem. They said, "What do I need this headache? I want to be a balabas. I don't need to take a communal responsibility." So all the Omar Komehon Ben Babi alapakia. So he cited for them this Mishnah that Ben Babi is listed among the list of people with responsibilities. He was in charge of the wicks. Ben Babi had a menial task, and yet he's listed with the greatest leaders of the generation who had like these monumental tasks in the temple. He says if he's listed just because he twisted some wicks, so imagine how your names will be remembered for all posterity because of your communal leadership responsibilities to take care of your fellow Yidden. So therefore, this is the incentive they try to impress upon them that they should volunteer to become the parnasim of the community.
Shimshon's mother, that's why she was Zechus to have Shimshon. She used to prepare wicks.
Ah, really? Very nice. Okay, good. Okay,
What did he say?
that Shimshon's mother used to prepare the wicks for the Mishkan, so therefore she was Zechus to have such a son. Very good, very good. Okay, Ben Arza al Hatzalotzal. Ben Arza was in charge of he was the conductor. He was the one who told them to start playing. Ki hada taninan taman heinifa sagan besudarim vehikish Ben Arza al Hatzalotzal. That we learn in another Mishnah that the Sagan Kohen Gadol, the assistant Kohen Gadol, would wave a flag or a kerchief, and the conductor Ben Arza would ding on the cymbal, I guess, and then that was the time to say that it was time to start playing. Hugras ben Levi al Ashir. This Hugras ben Levi was in charge of song. Amar Rabbi Acha Ne'ima Yisera HaYodea, that he knew how to prolong a certain kind of singing, that he had an additional either a longer note he could sing than everyone else, or he had some kind of additional quality to his voice. It's really
melodious.
Melodious. It's really not clear from the language exactly what was the advantage that he had. But there was something more that he had than anybody else. V'amru alav al Hugras ben Levi shohyamanim es kolo bezemer, that he could actually use his voice to make it sound like a musical instrument. V'cheshahaya noetz godlo b'sof piv hayamotzi kama mine zemer v'yukol echav ha'kohanim nizkaron lo bevas rosh. He could stick his thumb in his mouth and knew how to do a certain kind of whistle that could imitate multiple different musical instruments. And when they would hear his fellow Levium would hear, or the Kohanim would hear him, they would like do a double take. In other words, they would all turn around in astonishment at, wow, this guy is really talented. It's like, those beatboxers that you see on YouTube. They're amazing. Okay, Bass Garmo. You know what I'm talking about, Rabbi Black?
I do.
Okay.
I don't think the audience on YouTube, on Kosher Tube, do.
Okay. Anyway, Bass Garmo. You know what I'm talking about.
Some people, I don't know if it's true, that supposedly they can sing harmony with themselves. You can get two notes.
That's amazing.
Whoa.
I saw a beatboxer on this, Ted.
What is the beatbox?
All right. Look it up.
Okay.
Look it up on Google. TED. You know TED? There's a beatboxer on TED. Unbelievable. So just do Google beatboxer on TED. TED. You'll immediately understand.
Two voices there.
You'll see. Beis garmo al masei lechem hapanim.
PEAT?
TED.
No, beat.
Beat. Like a beat. Beatboxer. Okay. Beis garmo al masei lechem hapanim. Beis garmo, the family of Garmo, were in charge of the showbread. They manufactured the showbread for the temple. Beis garmo hayubikin b'maasei lechem hapanim uveridiyaso v'lo ratzu l'lamed. They knew there were two skills that you needed to have. You needed to know, number one, know what ingredients went into the lechem hapanim, and there was also something unique about this bread. It was in the shape of a letter U, and as a result, it took tremendous skill not only to know how to form the dough, but also how to remove it from the oven and the mold that it was baked upon in such a way that it wouldn't break upon removing it. It was a tremendously skilled labor. And they didn't want to teach anyone. They didn't want to. It was basically a family secret that they didn't want to share with anyone else because they wanted the monopoly on this particular act. So
confusion inside.
You'll see in just a second. So shalchu chachamim v'hedi umna me Alexandria sho yibekin b'maisei lechem hapanim uveridiyasa lo hayu bekin. So what they did is that the Chachamim said, we're not going to let anyone monopolize temple service. And they said, you know what, there are very smart people, there are scientists who live in Alexandria. We'll go import some knowledgeable people, and we'll get them to come in and manufacture it for us instead. And they told Beis Garmo, we don't need you guys anymore, because we're going to figure out. The problem was, the scientists from Alexandria were able to figure out how to make the bread, but they couldn't figure out how to remove it from the molds without it breaking. So, Beis Garmo, one second, you'll see. Beis Garmo hayu masikin mibifnim verodim mibachutz, v'lo haisa misafeshes, ve'elu hayu masikin mibifnim verodim mibifnim, v'haisa misafeshes. Now, there's a difference in Girsa between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi about this story, but the way that the Yerushalmi has it is that the mold would be placed in the oven, and the way that Beis Garmo did it is that they placed the bread on the outside of the mold so that it would bake uniformly, so that it wasn't directly in contact with the heat. But the other people who didn't know that chachma, they placed the dough on the inside of the mold. It was in direct contact with the heat, so one side baked thoroughly and the other side didn't bake properly. That's at least one way of understanding it. And the problem was that as a result, when they would take it out of the mold, even if it wouldn't break, it would get moldy, the bread, because it hadn't been properly baked. It wasn't uniform. So anyway, what Kaven Shiyadu Chachamim B'Davar Hazeh Amru Kol Masha Bara Kodesh Baruch Hu Lichvodo Bara. So once the Chachamim discovered that they were bested by Beis Garmo, they basically made a theological resignation, and they said, everything that Hashem creates in His world, He creates it for His honor and for a purpose. And basically, we have to assume that God gave Beis Garmo the monopoly. It's God's will. God did it for His honor. Shenamar Kol Po'al Hashem L'ma'anehu. Everything that God makes is for His sake. So shalchu achareim v'lo ratzu lavo at shekaflam scharan. So that they said to Beis Garmo, we want to hire you back. They said, not so fast. Not so fast. Now you know that you need us more than we need you. So we want to raise. So Yud Beis Mana Hayunot Lim V'Noslim Chafdala. They originally took 12 manas and they doubled it to 24. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer Chafdala Hayunot Lim V'Noslim Memches. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no, originally was 24 manas and now they took 48. Cautionary tale, of course, right? In other words, don't import your workers from China until you know that they're going to duplicate the work. So you have to be careful about skilled labor.
So much for union busting.
That's right. Yeah, right. Yeah, Ronald Reagan didn't hold of this Gemara. So Amru lahem mipnei ma ein atem rotzim lelamed. So then they said to Beis Garmo, okay, you got the best of us, but why don't you want to share the secret with anyone? So Amru lahen misaris hi biyadenu me'avosenu shehabayis hazeh asid licharev shelo yilmedu achim v'yaslu lifnei avodah zara shelahen. So we are doing it l'shem shamayim. We have a Masorah that this temple will eventually be destroyed. And if this secret of how to make the Lechem HaPanim gets out, then after the Churban, people are going to be making showbread for idolatrous purposes. They're going to try and create facsimiles of the temple and use it for idolatry, and that's why we're preserving the secret. But Dvarim Halalu Maskirin Osin L'Shavach, and the Gemara really is not prepared to buy that, but the Gemara says, but at least we can remember them for the good for this reason. Shelo yatsa biyad b'neim pasni kiyam me'olam shelo hayu omrim mimasi lechem haponim hen ochlim. They never allowed their children to ever have white bread on their table. They only had dark black bread, the less expensive bread, on their own private tables, so that no one should accuse them of pocketing some of the goods for the lechem haponim. And we're going to see now a similar story about Beis Avtinas. Beis Avtinas Almasei HaKetoris. Beis Avtinas was in charge of manufacturing the Ketoris. Shel Beis Avtinas Hayu Bekin Almasei Pitum HaKetoris Uvama'alei Ha'ashan. There are two skills. You need to know how to manufacture the ingredients that go in, and you also need to manufacture it in such a way. There's a trade secret that when it burns, the smoke goes straight up in a straight pillar, and that it has to burn in a certain way. Not clear exactly how that they did that. So v'lo ratzu l'lamed. They didn't want to share that secret. They didn't want to share the secrets of how to make the ketoris. Shalchu ve'viu umnin me Alexandria shel Mitzrayim b'hayu bekin b'pitam haketoris uv'mali ashan lo hayu bekin. So they sent again. They tried to circumvent Beis Avtinas by getting scientists from Alexandria to replicate the ketoris. They were able to replicate the ingredients, but they couldn't get the smoke to go up in the proper way. Shel Beis Avtinas ha'isa mitameres va'ola kemakel uposa v'yoredes, v'shel elu ha'isa posa miyad. The way that when the incense of Beis Avtinas would burn inside the heichal, it would go up in a straight column up to the ceiling, and then it would diffuse. But when these guys would make the ketoris, it would immediately diffuse and not burn up in a straight column. I would be curious if someone is an engineer or a physicist to see if they could try and figure out what was done differently by Beis Avtinas, that in some way they changed the chemical nature of this ketoris to make it do that. In any event, Kevin Shiyadu Chachamim B'Davar Amru Kol Ma Shebara Kadosh Baruch Hu Lichvodo Bara. Again, you have the same theological resignation that the Chachamim make, that everything God did, He did it for His own honor. Shenamar Kol Nikra Bishmi Lichvodi Berasiv, as it says that everything that is called in my name I created for my honor, etc. Sholchu Achareim V'Laratzu Lavo. So then they summoned back the house of Avtinas, the family, and they said, we want to hire you back. And they said, not so fast. And again, the same dispute. Was it originally 12 and they doubled it to 24? It was originally 24 and they doubled it to 48. So why don't you, they said to Beis Avtinas, so why don't you guys share the recipe already? Tell us how you do it. So again, the same answer. We have a Masorah that the temple will be destroyed, and we don't want idolatrous people who come after the temple to replicate the ketoris. That would be a disaster. So b'dvarim halolu maskirin osam l'shavach shelo yatsa isha mishal echad mehen mevusemes me'olam. So that, but we do remember them for the good, for the following. In other words, we must praise them for this at least, is that they never allowed any of the women of their family to ever wear perfume, so that no one should accuse them of using the incense of the ketoris to manufacture fragrances for personal use. And again, they made a condition, a stipulation. Whenever they would marry a girl from out of town, they would say, you want to marry me? If I'm from Beis Avtinas, you have to promise that you'll never wear perfume. Only under those conditions will I marry you. Now think about it. That's not an easy pledge for a woman to make. Women love to wear perfume. So this was a huge Mesiras Nefesh. Not everyone would agree to marry Beis Avtinas on that basis. So L'kayim Hashanem Arvisim Nikiyim Mehashim U'Misol. And again, this is a fulfillment of the pasuk that we learned about previously when we talked about the people who used to go in to they get the shekels from the treasury. They have to be clean. They have to be above suspicion, not only in Hashem's eyes, but in Israel's eyes as well. Okay, we saw this previously in Shkolim. Amar Reb Yossi Pamechas Hayisi Omid B'Yerushalayim. So you see that Chazal have this ambivalent attitude towards Beis Garmo and Beis Avtinas. On the one hand, we're critical of them for monopolizing these two trade secrets. But on the other hand, there's righteousness among them nonetheless, because they defend their behavior and they try to be above board in all areas. There's once, Rabbi Yossi says, Rabbi Yossi lives after the Churban. He says, once I was standing in Yerushalayim, and I found a child who was descended from the house of Avtinas. Amarti lo bini me'ezo mishpacha at. So I said to him, son, my child, what family do you hail from? Amar li mishpachas ploni. I said, I come from the following family from the house of Avtinas. Amarti lo bini avosecha lefish niskavna l'rabos kavodim l'maid kvod shemayim leficha kvodim nismayit kvod shemayim nisrabe. And I chided him. I said, my son, learn a very important lesson. Your ancestors tried to increase their own honor by maintaining a monopoly over the Ketores. And when the temple was destroyed as a result, they were consigned to the trash heap of history, because basically they have no function anymore. And God's honor has been increased. Now, how has God's honor been increased with the Churban? That's a difficult line to understand. The Bavli has a different girsa, but the way you understand it in the Yerushalmi is that when the Jewish people can maintain faithful to the Ribono Shel Olam even in the absence of a temple, this shows HaKadosh Baruch Hu's greatness, that he still maintains his monarchy even without the structure of the Beis HaMikdash. So therefore, even though Beis Avtinas is gone, God's monarchy remains intact and is even greater today. Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, Sach li Shimon ben Luga malakid hayisi asavim ani v'tinok echad mishal Beis Avtinas. So Shimon ben Luga told me the following story. He says, I was once gathering herbs with a child, and this child came from the house of Avtinas. V'ra'isi oso shabacha, v'ra'isi oso shesachak. And I noticed that he was first crying, and then he was laughing. Amarti lo bini lama bachisa. This should remind you, by the way, of the end of Maseches Makos, right? Think about that for a second. It's Rabbi Akiva speaking. So I said to him, my son, why are you crying? Why were you crying? So Amar li al kavod shel beis Abba shenismayit. Because of the glory of my ancestors' home, my ancestors' name, the glory of my ancestors has been diminished as a result of the destruction of the temple. V'lama sachakta, so why are you laughing? Amar li ala kavod hamasukin l'tzadikim l'silava, because of the future glory that awaits the righteous in the next world. I know my family, they were righteous people, and so even though in this world their glory is now diminished, but in the next world their glory is upheld. Umara isa ma'alei ashan l'negdi. So my son, what did you see? In other words, apparently this child had some sort of vision, thinking about something in his mind's eye. And Korban Eidah says that he saw some herbs burning. I'm not sure exactly how to explain it, but the child was having some kind of vision. So, my son, what did you see that caused you first to cry and then to laugh? So Numesi, Male Ashan Lenegdi, he said, I saw a pillar of smoke arising, just in the same way that it used to arise from the Ketores when my ancestors used to manufacture it. So Numesi lo bini hareuli. So I said to him, my son, show me, tell me the recipe. How did they do it? How did they make the Ketores so that the pillar would go straight, smoke would go straight up? So Amar li Rebbe Mesaris biyadi me'avosai shelo lahar oso liboraihu. He said, I'm sorry, Rebbe, I can't tell you. It's a trade secret. I've been sworn to secrecy by my family. What is it called? Like the Illuminati? Is that the? It's like one of those, one of those, the Templar Knights. Or it's like from the Da Vinci Code. Yeah. We can't reveal it to anybody, right? It's it's a holy secret. We can't reveal it to anyone. And so I'm sorry. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So basically, what you see is, here you see that they're upholding their integrity. It's not, you see it wasn't for financial gain. He was doing this because he really respected that this was a secret. They didn't want to let it out so that people wouldn't use it for avodah zarah. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Paga bizakin echad mishal beis Avtinas, u'megila samanim biyadam. I once met an old man from the house of Avtinas, and he had a scroll, and written on this scroll was a list of ingredients for the Ketores, for spices. Amar li Rabbi l'sha'avar hayu beis abed sunuin, v'hayu mosrin es hamagila hazos elu la'elu. He said to me, Rebbe, in past generations, the Avtinas family was extremely discreet, and we would pass this scroll from one generation to the next. without problems. However, va'achshav she'enon beis abba ne'emanim heilachas hamagila v'hizaher ba. But now the house of Avtinas is no longer indignified, it no longer has the integrity to preserve the secret. So I'm giving it to you. I'm giving the scroll to you, even though you're not part of the family, but you're a great sage. You'll be able to hold the secret. It's almost like the Da Vinci Code. Here, my son, take the scroll. It's been in my family for centuries.
They could make a movie about this.
Right, yeah, that's right. So anyway, when I showed this, when I told the story to Rabbi Akiva, he began to cry. He says, you see, the integrity of House of Athenas, they weren't just doing this for financial gain. We should not criticize them anymore. Now that we see they've been maintaining their faithfulness to the secret, even when there's nothing to be gained by them.
The other family? They don't bring up the other family.
Yeah.
They probably say the children all die, no?
Beis Garmo? Is that the children? I don't know if such an agadata. Maybe there is something. You'll
Doesn't
have to
explain the extortion of doubling their wages.
They don't be taken for granted.
They don't. Yeah. That's right.
That doesn't
Next
seem
time,
the
they're
whole
gonna,
purpose.
next time they'll think twice. 'Cause they'll go up again.
The reading of the Gemara says that the rabbis came to them and said, I don't want to come. He didn't say, I don't know, go by the law, he didn't say, I want more wages. And he said, okay, come, and you know what, I'll pay you twice as much. Okay, you're going to pay me twice as much. So it could be that.
Okay, Elazar ala paroches. Elazar was in charge of the curtain. Shahayamimuna al orge paroches. He was in charge of the weavers of the paroches. Pinchas hamalbish. He was the clothier. So Shahaya Malbish Bigdei Kahuna Gedola. He was in charge of manufacturing the garments for the Kohen Gadol. Ma'aseh Kohen Echad Shehilbish Leistaratios Echad V'Naslo Shmonas Uvim V'Istamrin Trei Asrei Yohavlei. It was once a Ma'aseh that a Kohen gave a garment from this house that manufactured the clothes to a certain non-Jewish officer. It's not clear what right he had to do that. Maybe he was coerced into doing it. But in any event, this Roman officer gave him 8 gold pieces, and some say 12. This is an exorbitant amount for a piece of clothing. It's a demonstration that the quality of this clothing was far superior than anything else that was out there. Let's go on to the next Mishnah. Ein pochesin mishiva amar kolin ushlosha gizbarim. That when it comes to having oversight of temple property and the monies distributed and the goods distributed, you need to have checks and balances in the temple. So you had to have no less than 7 Amar Kolin. And Amar Kol is a contracted word of Amar Kol. He says everything. He's the boss. He's like sort of the managers. There were 7 managers, Ushlosha Gizbarim, and 3 people that were under them, which are the treasurers. They deal directly with the money, and then you have people that manage them. And in general, you're not allowed to have any position of financial leadership over a community with less than 2 people, because you need to have each guy be checked by the other. Except the exceptions are, of course, that when you have a guy like Achia, who was the physician in charge of healing the Kohanim from their intestinal problems, and you had Elazar, who was in charge of the paroches, since the community universally trusted them, then you see that there are exceptions. If the community by consensus says, we trust this one guy to take care of our funds, so then it's okay. The Gemara now says, Ein pochsin megimel gizbarim umizayin amar kolin. So where do we get this idea from that you have to have no less than 3 treasurers and 7 managers? So Tani, and so the Brisa now says, Mishnei Katlikin. There also have to be 2 Katlikin. And now a Katlik is even above an Amar Kol. A Katlik is the head guy who's just below the king and the Kohen Gadol. And you had to have 2 of those. Then you had to have, beneath them were 7 managers, and beneath them were 3 treasurers. I'm not sure why that structure works. You would think that there should be fewer managers than treasurers, but for whatever reason. Maybe it was...
Shows how much oversight you require.
Maybe it was 3 treasurers per Amar Kol. I'm not sure if it's possible to learn that way. So, and this is based on a pasuk. V'yechil v'uziyahu v'nachas. So that part of the pasuk, the 3 people, that refers to the Gizbarim. And then the pasuk continues and it says, Va'asael, v'yerimos, v'yozavad, va'aliel, v'yismachyahu, umachas, uvnayahu. And these guys, these 7 were Pekidim. They were the Amar Kols. Okay, those were the. I'm sorry. Umachas u'benayahu, they were the Amar Kols, and Pekidim miyad Konanyahu v'Shimi Achiv, they were the Katlikin. And then the last part of the pasuk says that they were assigned by Konanyahu and Shimi, his brother. Those were the Katlikin. So you see that the hierarchy is 3 Gizbarim, and then above them are 7 Amar Kolim, and then above them are the 2 Katlikin. B'mifkad Yechiskiyu HaMelech va'Azaryahu Negid Beis Elokim HaMelech v'Kohen Gadol. And then finally, above them all were Chizkiyahu the king and Azaryahu the Kohen Gadol. And those are the 2 highest leaders, and that's the king and the Kohen Gadol. Kishu Choseim HaGizbar Choseim v'Nosla Amar Kol. Now, the Gemara now tells us the protocol. If you ever wanted to, let's say, transport a chest, perhaps, of goods that belonged to the temple, you needed to make sure that there was a procession of different seals on the box before you could transport it. So the Gizbar would put his seal on it, and then he would give the box to the Amar Kol. Amar Kol Chosem, then the Amar Kol would put his seal on it, Benosa Lekatlikon, and then he would give it to the Katlik. Katlikon Chosem Benosa Lekohen Gadol. The Katlikon would then put his seal on it, and then give it to the Kohen Gadol. Kohen Gadol Chosem Benosa Lemelech. The Kohen Gadol would put his seal on it and give it over to the king. And then the king will put his seal on it. So now you have, how many seals? I don't remember how many it is, but it's a bunch of seals, one on top of the other, to show that this has been the highest level of security. Then when it was come time to break open the chest, the Melech would see his seal and break it open. Kohen Gadol roa chosma umatir. Then Kohen Gadol would be in charge of breaking his seal. Katlikon roa chosma umatir. The same with the Katlikon. Amar Kol roa chosma umatir. Same with the Amar Kol. And Gizbar roa chosma umatir. The same thing with the Gizbar. So you see that this was a sort of checks and balances system to make sure that there was no embezzlement. Ein osin sarara latzibur b'momen pachos mishnam. You need to have at least 2 people anytime you have leadership over a community involving finance. So Rav Nachman b'shem Rabbi Mana al Shem v'heim yikchu es azav es atcheles v'es argama. We know this based on a pasuk which says they shall take the gold and silver for the donations of the Mishkan. They is 2 minimum, so therefore you see you always need 2 at least. Amar Rabbi Chama Bey Rabbi Chanino mipsola shaluchos ha'eshir Moshe. You're going to look at this Gemara and you're not going to understand it until you get to the end of it. He says as follows, Rabbi Chama. He says, how did Moshe become independently wealthy? From the residual stone chips from the luchos. God told him to hew the luchos out of precious stone. Some say they were emerald or ruby. Some say it was another kind of precious stone. And from those, the chips that were left over, Moshe was able to pocket, and he became wealthy. We learn it out from the words pisolacha. God says, hew for yourself the 2 tablets. The word hew is psol, which also uses the word pisoles, which means the leftovers. So Moshe got to keep the leftover stone chips. Amar Rabbi Chanin machsev shel avonim tovos umargolios barlo kodesh baruch mitoch ahalo umimenu he'eshir Moshe. That no, that's not how Moshe became independently wealthy. He became wealthy because God miraculously had his tent. Right underneath his tent, there was a deposit of precious gems, a quarry of precious gems right underneath his tent, so he could always have whatever precious stones he wanted. And that's how he became wealthy. Now, why is this important, that Moshe should become wealthy? So take a look at the next Gemara. The Torah says that the people gazed at Moshe until he walked from where he was speaking to them until he got to his private tent. So Trein Amoroin, there's a machlokus as to why people gazed at him. Chad Omer l'genai v'chad Omer l'shvach. One says that they looked at him contemptuously, and one says that they looked at him in a admiring way. Man Omer l'genai, chamon shakin, chamon karin, chamon kopeid, achil min diyudoi. They said, look at this guy, look at his legs, look at his pulkis, look at his feet, look at his kopeid, I think is his head, I'm not sure. But they said, how do they translate head? Is it
fatty flesh?
His fatty flesh, kopeid. He's healthy. Kanai Nahara, Moshe Rabbeinu is healthy. Where do you think he got all that money from to be so healthy? He got it from us. We paid his bills. Right. So, that's the whole point. The point was that the Ribbono Shel Olam wanted Moshe to become independently wealthy in order that people should not be able to say that. So that, because when you're on the payroll of the community, You lease a new car, you go on vacation, and everyone's saying, "Oh, Rabbi's got a new car. Oh, look at that. That ever happened to you, Rabbi Black?"
My cars aren't worthwhile.
Yeah. Or vacation. So you don't. That's why the rabbi has to be very discreet. He has to. Any community leader who's benefiting from communal funds has to live a humble life, so that people. But even when he lives a humble life, people say, "Oh, he's put on a few pounds. Look, he's eating. He's living on the high hog." So that's what people. Right. And we're footing his bill. I want to know. I want a reckoning. You work for me, Rabbi. Okay. The Shaisim in the Yehudai, and he drinks from the Jews. He's drinking all of the assets of the Jewish people. And Kol Midilei min Yehudai, everything that he has is from the Jews. But that's why Hashem wanted to make Moshe independently wealthy, so that that you should avoid that problem. Uman Dharma L'Shvach. But then there's another opinion that they gazed at him with tremendous admiration. They said, look at this great tzaddik, and what a zechus it is to be able to see that we were zoicha to see the great Moshe Rabbeinu. So that's another opinion. But the truth is, elu ve'elu divrei elokim chayim. You have people that have a begrudging eye and people that have a very generous eye. And both of those people are in the same kehillah, right? They're part of the same Klal Yisrael. Some people looked at him contemptuously, and some looked at him with great admiration. Next, Mishnah says, Dalet Chosamos. Wow, what a soapbox. Dalet Chosamos Hayu B'Mikdash. There were 4 seals that were in the temple. Now, there was a system here. This is the financial system that worked. When I come to the temple and I need to purchase libations, the animal I'm purchasing outside the temple, but the libations, the flour, the oil, the wine, I'm purchasing inside the temple. The merchants were right there. You came to the temple and there were people. You'd go to a special place, and what would you do? You didn't give cash for the libations. You gave cash to the seal man. The guy would give you a ticket. Okay, it was like a piece of clay which had writing on it, and then you'd present it. You go to the next window, and you'd present it to the guy in charge of the dry goods, and he'd see the seal on the word on your seal, and you'd give him the seal. He'd keep the seal, and he would give you the goods. So because of Alehen Egel, this was the more efficient system, okay? There were 4 different kinds of seals because there were 4 standard libations that you needed. Either it was said Egel, Zachar, Gedi, V'chote. And the 4 seals were, Egel means a calf, which means that if you were bringing any kind of bovine sacrifice, whether it was a bull or a calf, so then you have one measure of libations. Zachar refers to a ram, and that refers to a korban asham or other kinds of korbanos, which a ram, which is a 2-year-old sheep, was required, and that had its own unique libations. Gedi was any time you were bringing a sheep or any family of sheep that was younger than a ram, so then that had its own libations. And v'chote, and this was for the mitzorah. The mitzorah had 3 animals that he had to bring, so he had a huge amount of libations, 9 loaves of oil. He had a lot of stuff that he had to bring, plus an additional log of oil, right? So therefore, for putting on his toes and on his ear and on his thumbs, so he had a lot of. He needed to pay a lot more. So they would give him as his own unique seal. So Ben Azai Omer, hey hayu, that there were no. I disagree with you on 2 points. Number 1. There were not 4 seals, there were 5 seals, and va'aramas kasav, and the words were written not in Hebrew but in Aramaic because that was the common language back then. And the 5 words were Egel, which is the same in Hebrew, a calf; Dachar, which is the same thing as Zachar, which is a ram; Gedi, a sheep or a goat; but the last 2 were Chote Dal v'Chote Asher. You had to divide whether the mitzorah was poor or whether he was wealthy. If he's poor, he only has to bring 1 animal as a korban, and therefore his libations are far fewer. And if he's wealthy, he brings 3 animals, and the libations are far more. The Gemara will explain what the machlokus between the Tanakam and Ben Azai is. Egel mishamesh im nischei bakar gedola mekutanim zachar munekevos. The seal that had the word Egel on it was used for libations for any kind of bovine sacrifice, and it didn't matter whether it was a big animal or small animal. It didn't matter whether it was male or female. It always had the same type of nesachim. Gedi mishamesh im nischei hatzon gedola mekutanim zachar munekevos. If you had the word Gedi, it was universal for any kind of sheep or goat, and it didn't matter whether it was big, small, male or female. chutz mishal elim, except if it was a ram, which is part of its own family, but it had its special seal because its libations are different. Ayil mishamishim nischei elim bilvad. The ayil seal was only used for when you had to bring a ram, no other animal. And chote mishamishim nischei shalosh behemos shel mitzora. And the seal of chote was for the libations for the 3 animals that a mitzora had to bring. Mishu mevakesh nesachim. So the protocol was as follows: if you needed libations, holech lo eitzel Yochanan shumamun ala chosmos. You first went to the window where Yochanan was working, and he was in charge of the seals. You gave him the money; he gave you the appropriate seal with the appropriate word on it. Balo eitzel achia shumamun ala, and then you go to the next window, which is achia, or his stand, and he was in charge of distributing the flour, the oil, and the wine. You would give him the seal, and he would give you the goods. So at night, they would do in the inventory. They would go through the receipts, right? So basically, Yochanan had all the cash, Achia had all the seals. But now you had to get the cash to Achia because he was in charge of distributing the goods. So he needs to be given the cash to pay the vendors. So Achia motzi asachos mos umakabel kenegden mos. So Achia would give Yochanan the seals, and then he would get the cash, right? Im pachsu pachsu lo v'yishalem Yochanan mi beso. If there was for any reason less money than seals, there was a shortage, right? Someone was pocketing the money, so Yochanan would have to assume the responsibility of paying from his own pocket to make good on the loss to the temple. And if there was a surplus of money, there was more money than seals, that Beis HaMikdash also gets the error in their favor as well. We don't have to assume that maybe some of the money was Yochanan's own personal money. Shiyad hektish aliyano, the hektish always gets the advantage. Misha avad chosmo. Now let's say a guy buys a chosm and oivei, I lost it, I dropped it on the floor, and it's low. I can't find it. What am I supposed to do? So mamtinan lo ad ha'erev. So they wait until the last carbon is brought in the evening. V'matzalo kedei chosmo nostin lo. And if at that point they find the guy's chosm, they clear out the temple for the last customer, and they look all around. If they can find the chosm, great. And then they'll give it to him, and they'll give him his goods. V'imlav lo hiyanostin lo. But if they couldn't find the seal, sorry, Charlie, you're out of luck. No tiki, no shirty. V'shem hayom kasav aleihen mipnei haramoin. And also, says the Mishnah, not only was one of these 4 or 5 words written on the seal, but also the day of the week was written on it. And that was to make sure that you were using the ticket from today and not from last week, or not from a different day of the week. And the reason is, says the Korban Eidah, at least one of the reasons, is because we wanted to avoid people doing something deceitful of perhaps they would see that there was a fluctuation in market prices, so they would buy the seals when the price was low on flour and oil, and then they would bring it to the temple a day later when the prices shot up, and they go into the futures market and try to exploit temple right. business. So therefore, they said no. The day you purchase it is the day you get the goods. We're not here in the business to help you make a living off the temple. Have a wonderful day. A good Erev Shabbos.